me or something else?
Yeah, it's about the ventilators. Yeah.
So, like I'm very, very curious about that because a very good friend of mine, maybe you know him at Boyden, he was telling me about that they are researching the same from MIT, and I was like, where is that based and where does it come from? And I was also surprised that I saw Biopack getting involved because I was thinking that you were in a quite different field, let's say, somehow. The next time we talked, I think we were both in a very different field than we are right now. But now it's all about ventilators all around the world. And why? How do we even think the ventilators can prevent further cases to happen?
Oh, I don't think it's anything about prevention at all. I think it's about mitigation of yeah. So once you have the it's actually a bit of a dire situation. I mean, when a person is put on a ventilator, it's you know, it's not a promising. That's not a promising thing. That's a kind of last ditch effort to keep them alive, is what a ventilator is for. It's only
okay. So it's for people who are already infected and they're already in a quite late stage. It's not when they're in the first stages. I had it completely different in my mind.
Yeah, no, it's just for when you're already extremely sick, and it would be a way to keep you alive.
Interesting. And how can it help anyhow? Like,
well, what happens is that the you know, I from what I've learned over the last few weeks, what happens is the virus causes a what's called a cytokine storm, a kind of in some individuals, they have a very profound reaction to the virus, and it causes their lungs to fill up with a kind of well, a whole bunch of stuff that's related to the body's response to fighting off the virus. And so the lungs become very filled with fluid and mucus, and they become very stiff, the lungs. And so it's extremely hard for people to breathe, and all the alveoli get blocked. And so the only way to keep someone alive under those circumstances is to deliver to them as much oxygen as you can at the right rates. And so you need ventilators to do that. And that's typically done by intubating them. So you put a tube down their throat, and and that keeps them from coughing, and you paralyze the patient to do that. And then they're like that for a couple of weeks until their body can. But it's not a high survival rate. It's if someone goes on a ventilator and they have this situation, I mean, it's not necessarily, it doesn't necessarily mean they're going to live. It just their odds greatly improve, I would say, but it's not a guarantee or anything.
Wow. Okay. Very interesting. Yeah. So I know that like Biopack, that you have been in collaboration with a long time, has been working actually with biofeedback for a very long period of time. And is there any intent in this direction? So maybe not for the cases that are already quite advanced, but are we trying to solve it like from ground zero, from why are we even so vulnerable to this specific virus? Because there's so many viruses. Why this one got so famous?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I've come to think of the COVID, this particular virus, as being an outstanding hack. It's
yeah, right.
That's a really good hack.
Like it.
Much better tweeter than POTUS, and it's it's a great biological hack, and it's great like personal or psychological hack, and also sociological hack. It's really marvelous how finely tuned it is. It's kind of amazing, like in terms of, there's a speed at which I think our nervous systems tend to operate, and so things like an earthquake or magma flowing down a volcano slope, those things all make sense to us because they happen at the speed that we run at. And the virus is totally like that. It totally, in fact, if anything, it's even quicker than we, and so it's like firecrackers or something. And whereas global warming, it just moves a little too slow. So it's just not quite visceral enough. But the virus doesn't have that problem. And so it's a little bit like, if you think of the Gaia hypothesis or all, a little bit like, you have all these sort of sophisticated primates, I don't know, 7.5 billion of us or something, and now pushed up against the edges of the way that the world is, and finally to the point of really eating everything. And as a consequence of that, ultimately running up against these other densians of the planet that are now, we're just like fully exposed to. And so it's a little bit like, perhaps it's not conscious or anything, but in the way that we understand it, but it does feel a little bit like the biosphere is sort of waking up to us in a bit, like it's kind of fascinating. And then
it kind of felt like that the Earth was asking for a pause. Yeah.
Yeah, just like, yeah, hold on a minute kind of thing. And it's been tuning it. It's like, it's quite insidious how it's sort of, well, I'm not even going to say insidious, clever, maybe, how it tends to spare the young and focus a little bit more on the decision makers.
Yeah, I like the separation between the young and the decision makers as the categories of society.
No, anyway, everyone, it's fascinating. It's been quite a whirlwind, and it's been super rich experience so far. I mean, for me personally, and very super full, extremely creative, ridiculously creative time, and so inspiring, really, too.
I have to say the same, but I would love to hear how it was from your side. I totally resonate with that. I think it was been my most creative in flow period, because I had other times of being creative, but it was kind of rushed creative. So tell me how it was from your side, because I totally resonate with that.
I've been finding the communication to be very simple. Mm-hmm. It's not complicated, and I guess whatever barriers were there before in terms of how people interacted, at least in my professional capacity, whatever barriers were there, I mean, they're largely gone. And so it's just a whole pile of people saying yes to things. And True. So it just feels very seamless, like kind of open-mindedness and willingness to try things, and willingness to participate. And it's really, really, really interesting. And also that I think there's a kind of recognition that this is the circumstance. And so what is being forwarded, there's so much in the way of really, really good ideas that are being forwarded, really thinking it through before trying to garner support too. I mean, I see that also. Oh, so maybe that's all part of it. It's maybe this is a good example of there's been some discussion about herd immunity, and maybe this is another kind of herding behavior of people, is that under certain kinds of circumstances there is a sort of coalescing of activity and focus, and it's marvelous to see that. It's really super interesting to see that. And it's not perfect, of course, but it pops up in enough places that it's just fascinating to see this quality of people come to the forefront. And something I imagine when I hear my parents talk about World War II and some of the experiences, the things that they felt during that time, it feels a little, some of the echoes, it feels like there were echoes a little bit of that. But that would be the only frame of reference I would have for it at all.
So kind of like the big, I would not call it a disaster, but I would like to put it like the big challenges, let's say, they kind of bring also very interesting qualities from inside of us. It feels like almost that an alchemy is happening now, right? Like we had the materials, but they were just kind of laying down, and then fire comes, like need for action comes, and then they get alchemized to better qualities or different qualities. I don't even know if they're better, but they're definitely different. And I kind of feel that also there is one very important mask that felt obligatorily, and that was I have no time. The I have no time mask has been our mask in the Western world for way too long, right?
Yeah.
I have no time for that. I have no time for the other.
Sure. Yeah.
And now we have all the time, and now what?
Yeah, it's so funny. That's true. Yeah, really true. I've been thinking a little bit about how I might, or just what in terms of what I've been perceiving, and like how I might think about this period maybe 10 years from now or something. I've come to think of it as maybe as the step, maybe something like that, like the step, probably.
The step towards?
Yeah, I'm not sure where, but the step. Yeah, enough has changed. Yeah, it's. I mean, of course, it's a disaster, but it's so. There's the psychological component of it is really profound, and in terms of like all the poking that it's done at all these institutions, the economic institutions and political institutions and social institutions, and all those, the poke that it's presented to all those things that we've normally regarded with a kind of solidity, and they're all sort of just in a way just reeling, trying to figure out their new bearings and how they fit in the world and how meaningful they are, and just some things like the nature of money and how it the Federal Reserve declared that they were just going to print an infinite amount of it. So I mean, they pretty much just said that they'll just print whatever's needed, and so it's just it's like, well, what does that mean then? And then distribution of wealth and all these things, they're all just circling now in a way, or in ideas like universal health care, and everything's been given a really big poke.
Exactly.
And that's what feels so surgical about it. Like, it's just so fascinating. I mean, in terms of what the biosphere kicked back to us was something that was, kind of on a just a pure physiological level, relatively benign. I mean, in terms of its actual lethality. I mean, and it can be very bad to get it, of course, but I mean, it's not like we're talking 30% of the population or something. It's small numbers, really, relatively, but the impacts of it on these institutionally are really profound. They're
very clear.
Yeah.
And what I find like fascinating is that, if we take it like metaphysically or metaphorically, when a virus attacks our physical bodies, it's actually the body that needs to kind of upgrade to be able to defend this virus, because it's something new that they have never seen before. And I kind of feel that this is happening to all our systems. So even though it's a physical virus, it kind of feels that it has induced viruses in all our systems, and they need to survive. And that's fascinating. And I don't know it happened.
Really, yeah, it's kind of antibodies that are like social antibodies and economic antibodies and all those things too. Yeah, it's really quite remarkable. That little and it's something that's not, the virus is not, it's neither alive nor dead. It's sort of thing in between, like from another dimension. Like it's just a kind of a hijack. I mean, that's what I think of it as, being a hack.
Exactly.
like it's totally just like it's a complicated chemistry, really. Like, yeah, just code. Yeah.
Okay. What I was discussing like some days before was with a friend that she's also like in touch with spirituality, and she was reflecting in, wow, we have been talking for so long about this world that we are waiting for. And right now, this world that we are waiting for has literally is knocking the door and asking us, what were you dreaming about? Because we can change many things right now. So what is this world we are waiting for? And many people are like, oh, I have no idea that this moment will actually come in my lifetime. And this is also fascinating because sometimes we tend to just judge that, this system has been like that forever and I cannot change anything. And now that we can change a lot of things, so what? Where are we heading towards? And I find it like interesting to start actually dreaming of what is this world after the coronavirus? Because there's gonna be a world after, and we better not make it the same. So how do we make a difference? How are you dreaming of a different world?
Yeah, so interesting. It's a real privilege to be able to have these discussions, that are enabled by internet, sophisticated technology, and when I'm sure in both of our cases, when we hear orders or requests or recommendations to stay at home, where we can pay,
Yeah.
we can do it, and we're actually kind of okay, and we can still order our food from wherever, and then you have, like, in California, it's like has very large um, kind of immigrant population, and then you have a lot of individuals like farm laborers and basically like service community, pretty much, who are in very different spot. They're just like totally, they're living under much different conditions generally, and the resources are really different, and so it's a kind of also really sort of really pokes at uh, this sort of disparity too, like in terms of our ability to respond to something like this, and who can sort of act in accordance with the recommendations of health professionals, and who's just completely incapable of doing it for whatever reason, like a good chunk of the population of Bangladesh, or in, I'm sure, sub-Saharan Africa. It's exposing also big differences in terms of the wealth of a country and how it can respond to something like this, and who gets to live and who gets to die. And so I think it's exposing a lot of things, and there's a lot of systems that are reeling, and I think it's really good idea to pay attention to all of it and take good notes, and then I don't know, do what you can, I suppose. And uh, I, uh, I guess I also see that there are things, that the ways that we behaved culturally and through our systems and everything, that have been really, some things that are just been really misguided historically, and some of these things are really ready to topple. And so by judiciously applying a little bit of energy, uh, can at this point in time, at this juncture, given this hack, that we can let some of these things go that haven't been serving us, and adopt new systems. And so there are some things, like, that are important to me. The idea of a universal health care in the United States is really important to me, and I kind of view it in the same categories I view, like, access to food and water and power and internet, and all those things should just be just part of how it is. Like, everyone should have those things, and it shouldn't be an issue of, like, whether or not you might lack the ability or resources to somehow obtain those in your life. They should just be there. And kind of once you get to that point, I think a lot of things start to change.
Absolutely. By the time, it's actually our only way of stepping up into the Maslow needs, right? Like by the time everybody has to eat and have clean water and a place to live, and additionally internet, we can completely start thinking about different problems. And this problem will be much more interesting because they will be about real evolution, not surviving anymore. Where we can be moving from surviving to thriving as humanity, and that
I think so.
will be a beautiful step. What I was realizing also is that it's the first time after quite a long period of time that being white and European or American, it's not a privilege. And this is major. I experienced it myself when I was in Sri Lanka, and I was literally walking on the street and everybody was calling me Corona. And that was so interesting because a few days ago before, I was a wallet with 2 feet walking on the street as Europeans are usually seen, in this kind of markets.
Yeah, they didn't want anything to do with you.
Exactly.
That's so funny. Corona. That's hilarious. Well,
yeah. And this will be very interesting by the time we open the borders again, because this will be faced from many, many Europeans and Americans, and we have no idea how it is to be discriminated. So it will kind of show us what we have been doing to the rest of the world for a very long time. And I think that will be also a very interesting step.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know, a lot to pay attention to right now. So you're in, right now you're in.
What is your focus right now?
My focus? Well, so there are a couple things. I'm involved with, of course, with this ventilator project with Ford. And so that's been primary. And then I'm also involved with what's called a small business innovative research effort. Mm-hmm. And so that look at recovery of basically 2 things, to keep people off of ventilators, to figure out how to keep them off of them, and to allow enhanced oxygen uptake. So kind of treatment modalities that'll be helpful for that. And then also during the recovery process, once you're been pulled off a ventilator and trying to start, breathing again on your own, like how does that work? And so I've been involved with a couple of initiatives related to that. And then also continuing to work with, on the academic level in this area of emotional and motivational real-time state monitoring. And this is the project that I was fully consumed in before COVID dropped in on us, and it's continuing. And right now it's continuing. There's ongoing collaborations with University of California, San Francisco, and University of California, Santa Barbara, that are related to this idea of communication between people. And what's really interesting to me about this work is that it's like when I'm speaking to you right now, there's an emotional motivational state foundation, and that's a function of the present environment that I'm in, and the data that's coming in now, and then also these kind of stored memories and thoughts that are resulting in a kind of constant coming to judgment, which is feeding back and affecting my physiologic state, which is then contributing to what I'm about to say to you next. And so there is this opportunity to kind of look at the circumstances that are with people that are a little bit deeper. And so let me just give you an example. Like, let's say we're talking here, and let's say that I had you or I had a third eye that was right here, that was superimposed on your Zoom screen. Mm-hmm. And that third eye would have a kind of quality to it, would have a kind of color, or maybe a pulsing quality, or maybe a glow, or it would vibrate, and that would tell me very specific things about you that you wouldn't necessarily be reflecting through your choice of words, and it would maybe be telling me a little bit more about, oh, okay, how close are to being able to trust one another. How might we know, like, are we a little bit nervous, or are we afraid of something, or are we displeased or pleased or bored or aroused, or those kinds of things. Like, tell us a little bit about like the emotional motivational state foundation you're in when you're generating the words that you're using, and the way that you're presenting yourself on video. It's a kind of undercurrent of information that, and normally if you're really close to someone, like, maybe just right next to them, you can discern a lot more. But now it's harder, especially when all we have right now is sight and sound to communicate with each other. So it's good, but it's like not good enough. And so how can we employ these strategies, these emotional motivational state measurements, to allow us to really communicate super successfully, and it would be really helpful in the context of a group, like if a group was working on design projects, or helping to problem solve, or in diplomacy, or any one of a million different things where people often have trouble communicating. Could you employ this information in a way that would result in, I guess I've come to think of it as the potential for our neurodiversity interface. We're all so different in the way our brains and bodies are put together, and so having more and clear, complete information about what's going on with someone will help bridge the gap between what we say and what we do, and our true understandings. And
do you feel that such an interaction that allow us to understand different types of feedback, let's say, would also might be able to cover a little bit more the emotional gap that virtual communication is creating? Because I feel that communication like that is great, but it does lack many of the aspects of you being here in the room with me. It's not the same level of emotional satisfaction that you get. It's impossible by the means now. Maybe this means can actually tap into that.
I think so. I think that it has the potential to allowing the emotional connection to be way stronger. It feels like there is potential there for that. And I think depending on how the information is sort of like, it's a kind of another hack. Normally we would only get this information under very unique circumstances, or circumstances that are precluded by having this sort of long distance communication. And so in order to bring that back in this circumstance, the data has to be transferred and mediated through the internet. And so the question is, like, how do you present that? How do you take this emotional motivational state data and put it in a form that's digestible by these other telecommunication modalities, so that people can get a handle on emotional state by hacking one of the other senses, the sight, our ability to see or hear? Like, how do you use those senses in a new way to be able to really understand the emotional state of another person?
Exactly. And I remember, like, from the last time that we talked, that was some months ago, that even though we have a lot of ways of recording human reactions, I will call it, I think we still have a little bit way to go between recording and understanding exactly what that does mean with 100% precision, so we can translate it. But because the technology has a very interesting characteristic. By the time technology tells us something, we take it for granted as it is true. So we better know what we're saying there. Right?
This is why it's better. It's totally spot on. And I think that this is why it's important to think about the data as a translation, not as an interpretation. So, and I realize that translations can sometimes be interpretations, because sometimes words in one domain, or what might pass for a word in one domain, might not be translatable into another, like the word duende or something, how it might translate into English or something, like it just doesn't. And but I think that there is potential um, for taking for having data be in one domain and then converting it to another, and then people can draw their own conclusions about what that might mean. And so then the question is, well, how to do that, and what kinds of modalities are employed in order to present that. And that's really the focus of the research, that exact subject. What you just said is precisely what this research effort is about, is how do you do this work so that it's actually like not bullshit, and it's not making things up, and it's meaningful.
And here comes another question that maybe it's a little bit more philosophical question, but it's always on my mind. How possible is the actual meaning of translation understand itself? So how possible is the brain to understand itself? Because we were practically trying to understand ourselves with ourselves. How far are we going to get down this road,
Well, you mean it has a recursive quality, but we're pretty good at that for whatever reason. We're uniquely capable. There's something about the way that we're put together that permits us to sort of get our head around recursive behavior. I mean, it comes up in all of our stories, the chicken and the egg. And I think we all understand the ambiguity of that. And the inroads that we've made to fundamental questions about, like for instance, one of the hot areas of that, at least one of the things I've been really interested in lately that's starting to get some serious steam, is this idea of, Einstein came up in early 1900, this idea of energy and matter, that they're related, E equals mc squared. And that was based on the work of Faraday and Maxwell, and really just a consequence of the development of the battery by Volta, around 1800. And all that happened really quick. And now with the information age, we're starting to get a better idea of the relationship between the production of information and thermodynamics. And it's really looking more and more like there's a relationship between information, matter, and energy, that they're coupled somehow. And it's it just seems increasingly more like it's a kind of we're living in a kind of information construct in a way. And for us to get to that point where that actually becomes, in a way, like understandable to us, it allows me to think that, well, okay, then maybe we do have a potential for being able to figure out a lot about what's going on and the way that the world really is, that we've been able to get to that potential point of realizing it's really just data.
What I find fascinating is that how close is the relation of the computer structure and the internet structure with consciousness, and how many times we actually use words that has been used in computer science to talk about consciousness. It kind of feels that we needed to create a system that imitates it in order to have the words to understand it somehow, or to break it down into speech. And I found that, the word download, I really have no idea how they said in the spiritual realm, the downloads, before we had the actual downloads. I'm really keen to know what they were saying, for example, the ancient shamans about downloads. Probably they were saying that spirit was talking to them or something. But the word download is so accurate in the way that you feel such an experience that is actually fascinating.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've heard the word channeling.
Yeah.
That kind of, or messenger. I'm a messenger, or I'm channeling. Hey, don't shoot the messenger. The yeah, no, that's interesting. The vernacular is, yeah, it makes up for. I mean, it allows for a lot. Once the vernacular gets developed, then you can kind of start wrapping. It creates the foundation, of course, to go. Yeah, I'm constantly amazed at the human capacity for understanding very regenerative ideas, very meta kinds of concepts that, um, uh, I mean, individuals that are talking about like just the fabric of reality and the nature of time and information and energy and and maybe all of it just amounts to like a little tiny peephole, that you're looking through into the universe as a whole, but it's still a pretty good peephole. It's pretty good. You can see a lot. And one of the things that keeps happening too is that it's all this stuff is related. So even though we might be highly siloed in our bodies and our brains, we can still perceive an aspect of the way that things are, and then with the presumption of connectivity or connectedness between things, you can start to use that to extrapolate into other domains, much like when we take a telescope like the Hubble or James Webb and point it to the cosmos, we see certain things, and even we're only looking at 1/10000000th of the part of the universe, we're starting to make up pretty good stories about, like, well, it's 13.7 billion years old, and there looks like there was a big bang, and there was, I mean, we are able to deduce all these things simply because we have an understanding of the nature of physical law. And so it's a little bit like, Sudoku, that puzzle where you're given some clues about like the way it is, and then you apply frameworks to be able to say, oh, okay, there's that rule and that rule, and therefore you can make the whole thing a little bit like it's patchy what we're seeing, but if we think about it enough, then we can start to pull it together. And that reminds me a little bit of a story about Isaac Newton. I think he came up with the idea of calculus during a plague, and so he was isolated, and really he was sent out to the country actually, and he was just like on his own, and that was an intensely creative time for him, and it was a consequence of just piecing it together in his own mind, but having the time to do it too.
Interesting. And the question comes also, like, we are amazing in creating stories and constructs out of ideas. We are really, really good in that. I remember once that I was kind of fascinated that we have made not only the whole theory and the whole story, but even a 3D model of why one specific star is blinking. And it was like taken to such a detail, and practically with not so many clues, like real facts of why this can be. It was just an assumption that was taken way too far for me. And the question is, like, we're amazing in constructing ideas on facts that we have, but what happens when these facts change? Because that's my question for the whole science right now. Science was based in Newtonian theory, and now we know that the world is quantum. How does that change how we do science? Because science is observation. And if the world is quantum, there is a gap there. You know what I mean? There's literally a gap.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, yeah, I love reading about when Bohr and Heisenberg and these individuals were first getting a hint of quantum behavior, like in early 1900s, like how they would write about it. And it's super interesting. They're like poets when they talk about the way that things are. And it's sort of like, and they start dividing into camps a little bit, even then, where some start to become more ethereal and spiritual, and some start to become more grounded in the truth of things, and or what they believe to be the truth of things, or reductionist methods, or I guess I think that's really been a struggle, I think, for science, is that it's based on this idea of observation and independent observation. And so, dealing with quantum mechanics is a struggle because clearly observation has an impact on, like, observation and basically measurement and reality are coupled phenomena. And so it is a little bit hard, I think, for science to try to get its head around that or orient to that. I guess I'd also say, though, that if I had to describe what, like, science really was, like, and I just coming at from more of a, like, how I think about art a little bit, and I guess I view science as I have an experience, and it's some kind of experience, and then I would like someone else to be able to have that same experience. And so I just describe it really well. So I'd say, okay, I was in this room, it was this temperature, I used these tools, this happened to me. And they just describe it really well. And then the next person that picks up that document that does all those things, and then they have that experience too. And I think that the world of quantum mechanics doesn't preclude that idea of the nature of experience. And
actually, I think the opposite. I think it kind of proves it, that by the time you put the intention to create something in the same way, it would actually most probably be on the same path, at least. Maybe a little bit different, because probably your intention is not exactly the same, because I think that's also impossible. So, like, even if you are working very closely with another researcher, your intentions cannot be identical by default, because you're two different people, two different views of consciousness, let's say, two different viewers of consciousness. What it was just coming into my mind as you were talking for science about, like, art. I was realizing that science has most probably also been the step that allow us to get to quantum mechanics, that allow us to evolve in a way that we can actually even understand this concept. Because the concept was there. It's not that we don't discover anything. We're just able to see further, right? Like the world and energy is there. We're just opening doors, let's say. So the first door was Newtonian, the second door was quantum, and I'm really looking forward for the third door. To tell you the truth, I would love if I can see that in my life, because already from the first to the second door, it's so much more interesting than it was before, that I'm just looking forward for the third. And probably we wouldn't be able to do it unless we had got down into science.
Well, I guess how I was going to think about the relationships between those things. So that another thing that binds scientists and artists, I think, is the use of technology, and and I just view that as a method or a tool that allows us to extend our perception or to extend our physical reach. I think both of those communities, artistic and scientific communities, are really interested in technology because of how its impact on human perception, really, and human perception and human action. And scientists are much more about the idea of how do you share an experience, and artists are much more about, well, how do I communicate a feeling?
Exactly. And the interesting thing about art is that it can create this rupture in your line of consciousness when you're looking in an art piece, just because its primarily goal was to express the inner world of the artist, to express this feeling. It kind of creates a landmark, it creates a rupture in your line of consciousness. So somehow it creates this gap that information can fall into place. And I feel that the scientists are in a very, very similar procedure when they actually perceive theories. Because it's interesting the way scientists actually even do science. It's very funny because they're obsessed about observation, but the initial idea of the theory, usually it's kind of a download before they start researching about it.
No question. scientific endeavor is absolutely artistically inspired. In every case, it always is. It always starts with a feeling, I think, and specifically a feeling that leads to a need to express. So either to express to themselves or to express to others. That's the impulse. It's the feeling that leads to the need to express, and then that leads to the scientific inquiry, I think, is how it goes.
And something else, like as you say, it's that I have been observing in my own personal path, but it's proven by history for many occasions of inventions, for example, is that this kind of, let's call them inspiration, both in art and in science, they kind of seem that they don't get only in one head. They get into multiple heads almost at the same time. So it kind of feels that multiple people are having very, very similar ideas, even for songs, for art, for scientific approaches, for inventions. And this is a very interesting observation. I would love your opinion about it. I do have mine, but I would love to hear yours.
Yeah, the gestalt of things, the way that information is sort of presented, and who has it, and if people are paying attention, then I guess you see it in Hollywood all the time. I'm really close to that. In Santa Barbara, we're just a couple hours away, and when you'll see a project pop up, it'll be like 3 projects that are all sort of similar for some weird reason. And then in the world of where I work, we deal with scientists all the time, and we'll often see requests for different kinds of projects pop up simultaneously in different parts of the globe within weeks of each other, different kinds of lines of inquiry. So there's something, it makes sense to me, because I think that, when a person's in an inquisitive phase and they have access to similar tools, and we're all granted this sort of marvelous ability, this body and these senses and this neural capacity to be able to receive information and process it. And so if we are able to be exposed to these things through whatever method, and the internet's really made it way easier in terms of being able to access these things, to me it seems reasonable that people could easily come up with this sort of very, very similar lines of inquiry, or although it wouldn't necessarily explain how it could happen historically, when people were often very far apart from each other, and the circumstances
and different tools
different available. And so there's so much when it comes to people, you have the Tibetan Book of the Dead, and they talk about the ability to communicate between mountaintops by simply sitting quietly and putting yourself in the proper receptive state, and a kind of understanding that comes with that. So there's a huge amount that we don't know about the way that people can communicate to one another, and then and especially when you start throwing in ideas like, that there's a relationship between information and matter and energy. And so, I'm waiting for that third revolution, or that third kind of breakthrough also, I think. And I think we can kind of, between these areas of consciousness understanding and quantum mechanics, and this deep dive into the way that people are through the use of psychophysiological tools and understanding how we process data and all that, we're on the cusp of being able to sort of get our head around that. Like, what is really what's going on? Do we dream the universe into being? Like, how does it work, actually?
Exactly. And that kind of brings for me another question that lately has become kind of a reality for me. Like, how many senses do we actually have?
Oh, well, we have we have more than 6 or 5 or whatever you want to say. Yeah, that is a super interesting subject to me, that it's related to this idea of interoception. And when it comes to performance, I've been working a little bit with theater performers lately, and So there's this idea that an interoceptive performer, or a performer that's aware of what's going on with them throughout their entire body, all these things that happen, these like little, the feeling in your stomach, that little pressure, or that tingle in your back, or that kind of lopsidedness feeling, or this velocity sensor that's located at the peripheral of your eyeballs, where you can see something moving, but you have no idea what it is. And all those things, I don't know, there's hundreds of them. But the individuals that have those or are aware of them, they apparently can do several things that others are not so capable of, which is the higher degree of empathy. And there's also a kind of, there's an experience, there's a relationship between that ability, interoception, and the ability to experience awe, like to be awestruck. And
so
also,
apparently people who are more receptive and this kind of mechanism, I will just call them mechanism or senses, they're more able to experience awe, practically.
I think so. Yeah, that seems to be the case. Yeah, and I think the other thing is that when you have these skills, and there's a performance technology called the Batdorf method, which looks at this specifically, and it's associated with the idea of the relationship of the development of interoceptive abilities, and how that can result in really enhanced communication from a performer to the audience. And there's this quality of people, and maybe it's encoded with the mirror neurons, but there's a way of perceiving that when the performer has been properly trained in interoceptive methodologies, that their performance becomes extremely believable, like it kind of transcends, it transcends into another spot.
Interesting. And for this state to come, how is it achieved from the person itself? I can understand that it becomes so very real that actually it's easy, the receiver can receive it as natural. So it's much more like it feels alive, it feels true, right?
Yeah, it feels alive, it feels true, exactly, yeah.
But how does the person who is performing it get to this state?
Oh, okay, well, so I'm familiar with one methodology, and that was the one it's called the Batdorf method. And if you'd like an introduction, I'd be happy to introduce you to Erica. I know her really well. Awesome. Yeah, she's the inventor of it, and she's been so it's a very successful program up in Toronto, Canada, out of York University. So here's an example. For a new student, what she'll do is somebody who's unfamiliar with just the first thing about interoceptive ability, she'll have them work really hard and get their heart rate up, and then she'll stand really still, and then she'll say to them, follow your heart down.
Okay.
And then you see the trail, because everyone can feel their heart beating when you're pumping really fast. But then follow it down, and then you can see the trail that the heart leaves, so then you can find it again when it's in a kind of a calm state. And then you can start to say, oh, okay, I just needed a path. Like, what's the path to get there? How do I focus my awareness and attention to that signal, which I previously had been just not even aware of, or ignoring, or not knowing how to get there. And so she's developed, there are methodologies for all these things, like the peristaltic contraction of your intestines, or the what's going on with your kidneys, or temperature. I mean, she's developed strategies for all of them as a way.
That's lovely, because I used to say a lot of times that when people tell me, like, what do we have like one or two brains? So do we have the brain and the heart? And I'm like, yeah, we have the brain and the heart, but we also have the brain of the liver, and the brain of the stomach, and the brain of the kidney. We're just not able to tap into them because we cannot access them consciously, but apparently we can.
I think so. I think it's possible.
That's awesome.
yeah, I absolutely, I feel that way. It is possible to access them. And yeah, I believe that there's no clear dividing line between the brain or we think that's up here and then the rest of our body. I mean, it's neurological and chemically mediated communication with no clear dividing point. I mean, it's all fully interlinked and connected, and yeah, they all have their own brains, and they all have their own intelligences. There's I think there's ones in terms of the heart. I think there's one neural path where the brain comes in and directs the heart, and I think there's 12 back from the heart brain. So I mean, it's all, yeah, super.
It was just a very good marketing of the brain the last 400 years.
Yeah, we're a little misguided there, I think. Yeah. I mean, it's where the eyes are and the ears are, so it's tempting to think that's where everything's at, but it's not like that, I don't think.
I think the eyes and the ears are there just because it's the higher point in the brain, in our body, and it's just the most convenient.
Yeah, it keeps them out of the dust, Yeah, I have a feeling it's very practical. It's not anything, yeah. Yeah, I think that's right. I think it is the whole corpus, really, the entire body. And
that is sensing, exactly. And that's exactly the point, right now in isolation, I think that's the most interesting part to observe. Even if you are in touch with people and you're doing things, it's still this feeling of something missing from the communication, from the interaction. And I feel that this has to do with the whole body communication. It's like when we are close to somebody, it's not only our brain. Even if we don't talk, we feel the other person. And that goes beyond talking or seeing or touching. And I think that's the point that you're working on. It's like super interesting to see how we could potentially tackle it or even understand it first.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I just, and this is, I think, where I mentioned this work with UC San Francisco, they're interested in this on kind of a, very kind of hardcore academic theoretical way. And then there's an artist that at York University also, he's the chair of the computer arts department there, that's really interested in that subject too, but from very much an artistic perspective. And I just think, and you look at these two different strategies, and they're both super interesting, and to bring them together, I think but I think this is really where having a profound sort of artistic research effort in this area, I think will be it's instrumental to allow it to come to fruition, because there has to be a way by employing those kinds of ways of thinking about the problem, like from an artistic point of view, the way that you might want to present this information and under what context, and just become hugely important. The mechanisms of delivery and the aesthetics of delivery, I think, of information.
Absolutely. And I would also love to see very soon also the beginning of the process to be emerged. So how do you get with ideas about new research? And like, I really cannot see the time that researchers will start using psychedelics to get their first ideas. I think then we will really have this extrapolation of of consciousness into the realm.
Yeah, no, but most really excellent researchers that I know are not strangers to psychedelics.
Yeah, it's surprise, right?
I think even Freud and cocaine, or who am I thinking of? It'll come to me in a minute.
So Alan, it was lovely. Thank you so much for your time. I really, really enjoy the conversations, like every time we have them. And it's just a joy to talk to you for some reason.
Yeah, the feeling's totally mutual, Aliki. All right.
Thank you so much. It would be lovely if you can connect me with this friend of yours, because that's a concept that I had in my mind. I had no idea that it actually exists. So I was fascinated for these things.
Yeah, I'll make a formal introduction through Messenger. It'll be Her name is Erica Batdorf, and I'll set it up today.
Thank you so much. And it would be lovely to have time in the next weeks also to have a new chat whenever you feel like that you have time.
Sure. Yeah, delighted. What a pleasure. Okay. All right.
Thank you so much. Enjoy your day that's
Bye-bye.
starting there.